July 3rd, 2016, Russia, Sverdlovsk region, Karpinsky district, outskirts of the village of Sosnovka. It's night and the forest next to the road looks dark and dangerous. It seems unlikely that anyone would want to wander here at this hour, but tonight the inky darkness between the trees is cut by the beams of phone flashlights. 4 people are walking through the forest. Sergei Serhlitsyn, Sergei Zapechnya and Alexander Gabdrakhmanov are leading their former classmate Kirill Smirnov into the thicket. They walk in silence, tense. Zapechnya is holding a shovel, which he leans on from time to time. Kirill doesn't look at it and seems to be lost in thought somewhere far away. His head is still buzzing from the punches. He's slightly staggering. A couple of times he stumbles and barely manages to stay on his feet. There's a small clearing ahead and Serlitsyn commands, "That's it, we've arrived, we're staying here." Kirill obediently stops. When Zapechnya hands him a shovel with a cold smirk, he accepts it obediently as well, without protest. He just looks on with slight bewilderment, as if he doesn't quite understand what it is. "Well, what?" says Serlitsyn. "Didn't you want something good? Now dig." "Dig what?" Kirill quietly asks again. Everyone else smirks, as if they were expecting this question. "Dig your own grave," says Serlitsyn. "You're not leaving here alive." He knows it's a joke, or rather, he thinks he knows because he's not a criminal and wouldn't take someone's life, right? "Why are you doing this, Seryoga? I only owe you 500, Kirill says just as quietly. But Seryoga comes closer, and Kirill's resistance deflates like a popped balloon. Gripping the shovel more comfortably with his trembling hands, he starts digging. "You are on the Streshnota channel, and today's case shows that danger often comes not from strangers on the street, but from people we know, right at home." Little is known about Kirill Smirnov. He was born in the town of Karpinsk, Sverdlovsk region, in 1994 to Sergei and Lyubov Smirnov. He graduated from school there in Karpinsk. The town is small, with only about 25,000 people, so, like many other graduates of Karpinsk schools, Kirill thought about getting vocational training and looking for a job in a more promising place. Even in Yekaterinburg, for example, there are definitely more opportunities there. After graduating high school in 2012, he entered the Metallurgical College in Pervoralsk, which is located 400 kilometers from home. Pervoralsk was just a stone's throw from Yekaterinburg, and besides, he had relatives living there. Student life completely absorbed Kirill. Friends, parties, girls. However, he didn't forget about home. He often called and wrote to his mother. He always congratulated her on her birthday. Their relationship remained warm. The woman missed her son and always waited to hear from him. In 2014, Kirill Smirnov had some trouble. He got involved in a serious fight. The details are unknown. Maybe alcohol played a role, maybe something else. But Kirill was seriously injured. The guy ended up in the hospital with a broken jaw, having lost his front teeth. The treatment turned out to be long and difficult. His jaw was put back together, but he never had his front teeth restored. His mother took Kirill home from the hospital as soon as he was discharged. The woman wasn't going to let her child go anywhere anymore. He'd had enough independence. That's enough. But as soon as he recovered, Kirill said, "I'm going back to Pervoralsk, Mom. I won't stay here." Kirill had a plan. He wasn't going there blindly. He wanted to get a job at the Novotrubny pipe plant. After all, he didn't study at the Metallurgical College for nothing. He's a specialist. He may not have finished college due to the injury, but there's no information on that. Lyubov, seeing her son's determination, just sighed. She understood Kirill. She understood why he was drawn to the big city. There's movement, work, chances to make it. Here, it's a closed circle where everyone knows each other, and there aren't nearly as many opportunities. And she couldn't control him anymore either. Kirill was already an adult and could make his own decisions. In Pervoralsk, Kirill still had a friend, Maxim Savinov. The name has been changed. He continued to communicate with him online. Lyubov reassured herself with the thought that her son wouldn't be completely alone in Pervoralsk, and if anything happened, relatives would help. On July 2nd, 2016, Lyubov Smirnova was at work. Whether it was spontaneous or not, it was on this day that Kirill decided it was time to leave for Pervoralsk. Of course, his mother knew about her son's departure. Kirill was supposed to take his belongings, documents, and 4,000 rubles with him. He had promised his mother a long time ago that he would definitely call or write to her when he arrived, so she wouldn't worry. The last time I saw Kirill was in July 2016. He said he would take the bus. He left when I wasn't home. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't call to say he arrived, even though we agreed on that, the woman told journalists later. But there were no arguments or conflicts before the trip. He didn't have any romantic heartbreak either. There was only one friend from Pervoralsk that Kirill talked to online. When Lyubov returned home, her son wasn't there. There was a bit of a mess in the apartment, which she didn't pay attention to at the time. Maybe Kirill remembered something last minute or was looking for something. Everything fit into the logical picture of someone getting ready to leave. The woman tidied up and went about her business. Toward evening on June 3rd, she started checking her phone, but there was still no text from Kirill. There was no news the next day either, but Lyubov already thought she understood the reason. Her son's charger was left at home. Without a charger, any phone turns into a useless piece of plastic in just a day. Lyubov just sighed then. Kirill had spent so long getting ready, and still he forgot something. He'll charge his phone and definitely call, she reassured herself. From July 3rd to 10th, there were no calls or messages from Kirill. Lyubov started to worry, but she was still trying to calm herself down. The woman was already imagining how she would scold Kirill for his long silence when he finally called. But the call still didn't come. Finally, July 10th arrived, her birthday, which Kirill had never missed. Lyubov hardly left her phone that day. She waited. In the morning, with a slight anxiety and anticipation, he would call any minute. In the afternoon, with growing irritation and resentment, could he really have forgotten, or is he that busy? By evening, only silence remained, pressing in and filling with uneasy thoughts. When midnight came and Kirill still hadn't called, Lyubov finally realized something had happened to her son. Calls to his number still went unanswered, and it had already been a week. He should have understood by now that his mother was going out of her mind with worry. In a week he could have found a charger, bought a new one, or borrowed one from a friend. In the end, he could have sent a text message from that friend's phone and just let her know that he arrived and everything was fine. Early in the morning on July 11, the woman went to the police and reported her son missing. The report was accepted immediately, and Kirill was declared missing. Lyubov, realizing that she had lost an entire week, could only wait now. Days dragged on, then a week. The first month passed as if it had simply been cut out of her life. No events, no news, no answers. The search went on according to the version of events that at first seemed the only logical one. Kirill left, and importantly, he made it to Pervoralsk. The alerts were first sent there and to Yekaterinburg. At the same time, as required, the investigation checked the morgues and hospitals, but nothing was found. The friend Kirill talked to online couldn't say anything. Savinov hadn't seen him. He didn't call him that day or afterwards. That lead was cut off almost immediately. Questioning acquaintances and relatives in Pervoralsk also didn't yield any results. It felt like Kirill left the apartment and just vanished. Lyubov Smirnova couldn't accept this idea as a given. She didn't just sit and wait. Not only because she didn't know how to wait, but also because waiting in such a situation meant slowly going insane. The woman turned to Liza Alert, an organization that searches for missing people. The missing person notices were sent out to neighboring regions. Kirill Smirnov is missing. Age, 22 years old, slim build. Height, 192 cm. Distinguishing features, missing front teeth. At the same time, Lyubov also contacted the Wait For Me program. By the way, I'll leave additional materials in the Strashnoti Telegram channel. Subscribe and check it out. Two feelings crowded inside at once. The fear that her son was no longer alive, and the fear that he was alive but something terrible had happened to him, and that's why he couldn't get in touch. She went to Pervoralsk many times, walked the streets, and looked into the gaunt faces of the homeless at the train station. What if Kirill had been beaten up again? What if he had been injured so badly that he forgot his own name? The woman had seen stories like that on TV. What if someone took her son's money and documents and now he's wandering around the city, lost and alone? But she never found Kirill. He wasn't among the homeless on the streets, and Lyubov had no choice but to wait again, to wait until someone told her that her son was alive, to wait until someone reported that his body had been found, which would mean that he was, after all, dead. Weeks turned into months, and months into years. People remembered Kirill. The excitement faded, but from time to time short notes appeared in the local newspapers of Karpinsk and Pervoralsk. Missing for a year, missing for 2 years, they've been searching for 3 years. The text was edited minimally, the numbers were almost the only thing that changed. And Lyubov Smirnova went where many desperate people go, not because they believe, but because there's nowhere else left to go. The woman went to psychics, or more precisely, to one of the well-known local clairvoyants. The fortune teller took money from Lyubov, waved her hands and told her that Kirill should be looked for in Pervoralsk. He's somewhere there. Whether he's alive or dead is unknown, the psychic concluded. Lyubov realized that even supernatural forces wouldn't help her. 2020 arrived. In July, it would have been 4 years since Kirill Smirnov disappeared, and most of his relatives and acquaintances had already lost all hope of his return. Only his mother didn't give up. Lyubov kept searching for her son and wasn't going to stop until she found him. In June 2020, the newspaper Vechernik Karpinsk once again published an article about this case, recounting Kirill's biography, the circumstances of his disappearance, and reminding readers once again, the missing young man has still not been found. The investigation was unable to figure out what happened to him. For the first time, the article mentioned a theory that had previously remained on the sidelines. Kirill could have become the victim of a crime. He didn't just disappear, someone made him disappear. The newspaper referred to data about the crime situation in the region. Yekaterinburg and Pervoralsk were large cities, and things like that happened there often, but even in Karpinsk itself, blood was sometimes shed. Maybe it's time to start looking for suspects, the publication asked. Who could have benefited from the death of Kirill Smirnov? It might seem strange, but it was that very publication that became the catalyst that actually restarted the investigation. Before that, Kirill was searched for exclusively as a missing person who left home and didn't return. After that, he was considered a crime victim. In August 2020, the newspaper's materials became the basis for reopening the investigation. This information will later be officially announced by a Karpinsk law enforcement official. A criminal case was finally initiated under Article 105 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation. Investigators once again began to go through the folders with materials, interviewing Kirill's relatives and acquaintances, but now they were asking different questions and getting different answers. It remains unclear why the police and the investigative committee did not draw conclusions about a possible crime earlier, but the fact remains that it was the publicity that made the case move forward. And this time, the investigators were lucky. In February 2021, the first suspect appeared in the case, a local resident, Alexander Gabdrakhmanov. The guy came to the police himself saying that his conscience was tormenting him and that he just couldn't go on like this anymore. "I know where Kirill is, I'll tell you everything," he assured them. Gabdrakhmanov wrote a confession. After reading the statement, the investigators saw not only new suspects, but also the most horrifying fact, one that stripped Kirill Smirnov's relatives of hope forever. Gabdrakhmanov claimed that Kirill died back on July 3, 2016. All this time he had been dead, and his body was very close to the house, in the forest. The guy never went to Pervoralsk. They came for Kirill right to his house. That evening, on July 2nd, 2016, Kirill Smirnov's friend Ilya Molchanov came to visit him. Maybe Molchanov wanted to support his friend who was moving to another city, or maybe he just dropped by chance. Kirill packed his things and shared his plans. Molchanov sat on the couch observing the preparations. Suddenly the doorbell rang. It was already evening. Kirill wasn't expecting anyone and reluctantly went to open the door. There were 3 people at the door: Gabdrakhmanov himself, Kirill's classmate Sergei Oserklitsin, and another graduate from their school, Sergei Zapechnya. Oserklitsin said he wanted to talk. His facial expression was gloomy and serious. Kirill stepped back, letting all 3 uninvited guests in. Molchanov greeted them, but he was barely noticed.
We went into the apartment, specifically into the back room. We talked, and during the conversation, a conflict arose.
Later, a list of the participants in the crime will appear in the newspapers, and Molchanov will be mentioned in it for some time as an accomplice or a witness. But in reality, he was neither one nor the other. This was stated by Gabdrakhmanov and later confirmed by Oserklitsin. The guy left the apartment almost immediately after Oserklitsin sharply told him to get out, since he didn't need any witnesses. Oserklitsin brought his friends with him for a reason. He knew that Kirill was leaving and came with a specific goal: to force his former classmate to pay back the debt. As Oserklitsin later explained during the investigative experiment, when he left for Yakutia in 2013, Kirill still owed him 500 rubles. For Oserklitsin, it wasn't so much about the amount as it was about the principle. After all, it was already the 3rd year, and Kirill still hadn't returned the money. The friends were supposed to act as spectators. Oserklitsin intended to explain to his former classmate that this kind of behavior was unacceptable. It became clear almost immediately that a peaceful conversation wasn't going to happen. Kirill was tall, but Oserklitsin knew how to loom over people, to pressure them, to show his superiority. He spoke through clenched teeth, insulted, and threatened with a beating. "If you don't want to do it the easy way, then we'll do it the hard way," he said, clenching his fists. During the conversation, Kirill was sitting on the couch, while Oserklitsin was pacing around the room in front of him. Then he stopped right in front of him and leaned toward Kirill's face. Zapechnya and Gabdrakhmanov stood a little distance away, watching the unfolding drama. For the time being, they didn't interfere. The investigation materials do not specify whether Kirill returned the money or not, but Oserklitsin lost his patience. Taking a short step toward the couch, he swung and punched Kirill in the head. The blow landed on the temple and the ear. The pain was so sharp that Kirill collapsed onto his side, covering his head with his hands. Oserklitsin struck again, this time in the shoulder, venting his anger with pleasure. "Enough, enough," Kirill pleaded. He didn't lose consciousness, but the blows made his head spin. Closing his eyes, he gulped air to fight off the nausea. Oserklitsin stopped and for a few moments looked at him with contempt. Then, nodding to Gabdrakhmanov to keep an eye on Kirill, he pulled Zapechnya aside. "Listen, we need to scare him properly," Oserklitsin began. "Make sure the bastard remembers for the rest of his life not to mess with me." Zapechnya listened attentively. "In short, here's what I came up with. We'll put him in your car and take him to the forest. We'll give him a shovel and tell him to dig his own grave. He'll definitely piss himself out of fear," said Oserklitsin with a cruel grin, already anticipating how much fun it would be. Zapechnya nodded. They agreed that while Oserklitsin finished working over Kirill, he would have time to move his car, the Lada, farther away from the entrance. Joke or not, they didn't need any witnesses. "I'll park behind the garages. There's definitely no one there at night," said Zapechnya, already jingling his car keys. He finished quickly, and Oserklitsin was even faster. He didn't even have to hit Kirill again. He just grabbed him by the shoulder and shook him. "Come on, let's go, take a ride with us." Kirill agreed without protest. Both Gabdrakhmanov and Oserklitsin himself, at least in their initial statements, would later claim that Kirill seemed to break down after the first blows. Pain and fear turned him into a victim, a powerless object of what was happening. He did not resist. When Oserklitsin ordered him to get up and go with them, he simply got up and went. The 4 of them left the house in silence. Zapechnya walked ahead, showing the way to the car, followed by Kirill. Oserklitsin and Gabdrakhmanov brought up the rear, and according to him, he had already stopped liking all of this by then. Klitzen watched Kirill closely, ready to pounce if he decided to run, but Kirill walked obediently. He was trembling with fear, but he kept walking. At the car, Gabdrakhmanov opened the back door for their captive, but Klitzen had a better idea. He asked Zapechnew to open the trunk. He turned to Kirill and jerked his head. "Get in, runner. Just hand over your phone." Kirill looked pleadingly at Zapechnew, but he responded with a completely blank stare. Kirill didn't run away, he ran silently. When the guy climbed into the trunk and curled up there in a trembling ball, Klitzen closed the lid with a thin smile on his face. The car started moving. They left the city and headed toward the village of Sosnovka. There was a dense forest there just right for their plan. On the way, Klitzen took apart Kirill's phone. "Let's leave him in the forest, let him take a walk," he told his companions, opening the window to throw the dismantled device out. Kirill's phone was tossed. "And that's so he doesn't call where he shouldn't." Before reaching Sosnovka at the Antipinsky spring, the car turned into the forest and stopped. Kirill was taken out of the trunk, still just as helpless and scared, and led deeper inside. There, among the trees, all four of them stopped, and Zapechnya, grinning, handed his victim a shovel. "Dig." Kirill didn't at first understand what was happening. "What am I supposed to dig?" "Dig your own grave." Clearly enjoying his role, Klitzen hissed. The guy started digging. His hands were shaking, the earth kept crumbling, and the pit grew deeper with every movement. It was a real nightmare, like something out of a thriller or a horror movie. Night, a shovel, a man digging his own grave. But Kirill was not destined to wake up. His nightmare was real. Klitzen and Zapechnya helped with shoves and blows. Mockingly, they told Kirill how they would bury him alive. There was such fierce anticipation in their voices that Gabdrakhmanov felt uneasy. He got scared. He said he would wait in the car and almost ran toward the road. There, climbing into the car, he was trembling and kept glancing into the darkness until he noticed the beams of flashlights gliding over the grass. Klitzen and Zapechnya were there, but Kirill was not with them. It was clear from Klitzen's face that it was better not to ask anything, but Gabdrakhmanov asked anyway. "No, I understand. And make sure you don't blab to anyone," he growled. Gabdrakhmanov understood. They reached the city in silence and later went their separate ways, swearing to tell no one and never to speak of it again. For all 4 years, Gabdrakhmanov avoided both of his former friends, and he gave Kirill's mother a wide berth. But his conscience tormented him. When he saw another article in the newspaper about the unsuccessful search, he felt his heart tighten. And finally, in February 2021, he couldn't take it anymore. In his confession, Gabdrakhmanov mentioned the names Klitzen and Zapechnya. The first one was detained immediately, and he confessed almost right away as well. Overall, his testimony repeated Gabdrakhmanov's confession: the conflict, the beating in the apartment, the trip in the trunk. But most importantly, he told the investigators in detail what happened next. When he and Zapechnya were left alone with Kirill, Klitzen was once again seized by rage, sudden, destroying any sense of control. Kirill obediently kept digging when Klitzen picked up a fallen tree trunk. Later, the case files would state its diameter was about 15 centimeters and struck Kirill hard on the back of the head with it. He didn't even cry out, he just collapsed to the ground. Klitzen didn't stop, he kept hitting him in the head and neck with heavy blows. Kirill lost consciousness after the first or second blow. His hair was instantly soaked with blood. Later, it would turn out that his skull was fractured in several places. Zapechnya also came closer. At least twice he struck the person lying at his feet with a stick on the head and torso. Kirill buried his face in the ground and fell silent. At the moment when the motionless, bloodied body appeared before them, Klitzen seemed to come to his senses for a second. He realized that he had crossed the line, that now he couldn't just write it off as a joke. If Kirill survives, he won't stay silent. A blow to the head with a stick until you lose consciousness isn't just to scare someone, this is serious. They needed to finish the job and then hide the body. Osoklitsyn turned toward the stove, nodding in the direction of the pit. The criminals understood each other almost without words. Kirill was lifted and thrown into the grave he had just dug for himself. Impassively and methodically, the criminals began to cover the body with earth. The stick, with scraps of skin and brain on it, was thrown far away. Everything happened just as Gabdrakhmanov said. After finishing his story, Osoklitsyn pointed to the place where, according to him, Kirill's body was buried. The investigative team immediately went to the village of Sosnovka. At the site indicated by Osoklitsyn, human remains were indeed found. They were buried shallowly, about half a meter deep. 4 years underground took their toll. The body had decomposed significantly. But fragments of clothing remained. It was by them that Lyubov Smirnova identified her son. Due to severe decomposition, it was impossible to determine the exact cause of death. The media quickly spread the version that Kirill had been buried alive and that death occurred as a result of asphyxiation. He was unconscious, his airways were filled with soil, and Kirill suffocated. In the official statements, however, something else is indicated. Death occurred as a result of a combination of injuries. This meant that Osoklitsyn and another accomplice lowered an already dead body into the pit, and Kirill died from brain damage or other causes not related to asphyxiation. The versions differ only in Kirill's final minutes, not in what actually happened. Sergei could not be questioned. In 2020 he froze to death at a bus stop. It was also not possible to question Ilya Molchanov, Kirill's friend, who was present in his apartment that evening. It turned out that he also died. He was hit by a truck. The only living suspect in the case turned out to be 26-year-old Osoklitsyn. He has been charged with crimes under Part 2 of Article 126 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation, kidnapping committed by a group of persons by prior conspiracy with the threat of violence dangerous to life and health using objects as weapons, and under Part 2 of Article 105 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation for taking a life in connection with kidnapping committed by a group of persons by prior conspiracy with the intent to conceal another crime. Alexander Gabdrakhmanov was supposed to testify in court as a witness. This circumstance raised a lot of questions. Even if we assume that he did not participate directly in the taking of Kirill Smirnov's life, his role in the kidnapping is obvious. He was part of the group, he accompanied Kirill in the car, he was nearby when the events unfolded. But Osoklitsyn was charged with kidnapping, while Gabdrakhmanov was not. Perhaps his cooperation with the investigation was considered a mitigating, justifying circumstance. In any case, only Osoklitsyn ended up in the dock, meaning he alone had to answer for the crime. He was facing up to 15 years in a strict regime penal colony. On Sergei Zapecheni's side, there was supposed to be a lawyer hired by his family. She intended to defend his innocence, and this side apparently had some kind of evidence. After learning this and hiring a new lawyer, Sergei Osoklitsyn changed his testimony. He stated that he had nothing to do with Kirill's death at all and that the real criminals were Gabdrakhmanov and Zapechnya. He stated that his own confessions were obtained under pressure, that the investigators pressured him, so he had to make everything up on the spot. The investigation reacted. К этим словам скептически. Osoklitsyn had already revealed too many details. He described the events too logically, down to the sequence. The logic of his statements was clear, and he could not have made it all up without any harm. The version didn't sound like a fabrication. It sounded like the truth. Then Osoklitsyn changed his testimony again. In the new version, he didn't deny that they brought Kirill to the forest and forced him to dig a pit, but he went with them voluntarily in the car's cabin. They just scared him and left him in the forest. There was no crime. It was a bad joke that unfortunately ended the way it did. I admit that on July 2nd, 2016, there was a conflict and a scuffle between me and Kirill, during which I caused him bodily harm and then punched him outside the city. I am ready to take responsibility for this. I regret it. I did not take Kirill's life. After I left him, he was alive. What happened after that I do not know. I know for sure that after my punch he was alive and that he could not have died from that punch, claimed Oserklitsin. Oserklitsin repeatedly emphasized that Kirill went with them voluntarily. He always had the opportunity to run away and call for help if he didn't want to go. But he didn't do that. Not with us. Everything was voluntary, he insisted. And Serlitsin's lawyer adds this. No one was going to keep him in the forest. He was brought there to dig his own grave. Besides, while he was at home, he could have called or asked for help. So to say, he was suppressed. His will was suppressed. My client can be tried for causing bodily harm, for punching him, but not for death. The cause of death has not been established. An additional circumstance was that the weapon used in the crime, that very tree trunk which, according to the initial testimony, was used to deliver the blows, was never found. Yes, Kirill had multiple skull fractures, but that did not prove that it was Oserklitsin who delivered the blows. The lawyer also appealed to Oserklitsin's character. He assisted the investigation, had no prior convictions, has a steady job, and is described positively. Sergei Zapechny had a similarly positive profile. An ordinary guy, cheerful and easy to talk to, who was involved in music. His lawyer insisted that Zapechny may have gone to the forest with the group, but he did not beat Kirill and did not take part in his death. She also reminded the court that the weapon used in the crime was never found. The lawyer insisted that both Oserklitsin and Gabdrakhmanov are simply trying to shift the blame onto a person who cannot defend himself. However, both Gabdrakhmanov and Oserklitsin independently claimed that Oserklitsin was there and was not just a bystander. Oserklitsin's lawyer, in a desperate attempt to at least partially relieve his client of responsibility, tried to point out the investigators' interest in the outcome of the case. As it turned out, investigator Romanovsky, name changed, who was on the prosecution side, and Alexander Gabdrakhmanov studied in the same class for a whole year and knew each other. And the lawyer claimed that this was exactly why Gabdrakhmanov was not charged. Gabdrakhmanov was in the investigators' good graces, and all the charges were pinned on the one who didn't manage to go to the police first. However, the court did not consider the ground sufficient for recusal. Gabdrakhmanov and Romanovsky were not friends, and after their paths diverged, they did not communicate. The investigator could not have had any personal interest in this case. Also, during another interrogation of Gabdrakhmanov, an interesting detail came up. He claimed that he heard Oserklitsin and Pechenya on their way home that night, agreeing with each other to come to the crime scene together and hide again. This could have been confirmation that Kirill actually died before he ended up in the ground. But this did not absolve either Oserklitsin or Zapechnya of responsibility for his death. If you want even more videos, go to Boosty if you're from Russia, and Patreon if you're not from Russia. There you'll find exclusive videos that aren't on YouTube, the links are below the video. In this matter, especially for me, there's a sharp contrast between people's inner states and how they show themselves through their actions. Kirill is perceived as a person with a fairly sensitive psyche and little ability to resist in a critical moment. Before the events, he lives a fairly ordinary life. He has plans, connections, and a desire to get out of his limited environment. This suggests that he does have basic initiative and a desire to move forward, but under direct pressure, he literally collapses. In a threatening situation, he doesn't switch to fight or flight, he freezes and submits. This is the type of reaction where fear completely shuts down his will. He has no aggression, no attempt to stand up for himself, even when the threat becomes obvious. Such behavior usually develops either due to a lack of experience with tough conflicts or because of a deep-seated belief that it's better not to provoke, as things will only get worse. As a result, he turns out to be psychologically unprepared for violence, and this is exactly what makes him most vulnerable. And Serlitsin's approach is the opposite. He has a pronounced need for dominance and a painful fixation on control and justice, but only as he sees it. Money here, of course, is just an excuse. What's more important is the feeling that he's not respected, that he's been cheated. This affects not the rational part, but his pride. Money. What's more important is the feeling that that's why there's demonstrative behavior, pressure, humiliation. At the same time, he has an important trait. Up to a certain point, he himself believes that everything is under control and that this isn't really a crime. This is a classic illusion of controlled violence when a person thinks he can stop at any moment. Well, you know, like drunks who say, I drink when I want, and as soon as I want to stop, I'll stop right away. That's also an illusion. But when emotions surge, control disappears completely and the violence can't be stopped anymore. Sir Klitzin's aggression isn't cold and calculated, but impulsive, with sudden outbursts where decisions are made in just a second. After crossing the line, he starts acting not out of emotion, but out of fear of the consequences. And that's when cold rationalization kicks in. He needs to finish it to avoid any problems. Zapechnia appears to be a person with low internal autonomy. He is not an initiator, but he is not a restraining factor either. It is important for him to be part of the group, not to be excluded from it. Such people often adapt to a stronger leader and begin to act within his logic, even if they did not have their own intentions at first. He doesn't have the pronounced cruelty of Austerlitzin, but he has a dangerous passivity. He doesn't stop what's happening and gradually gets drawn into it. This is a type of accomplice behavior without internal conflict, when moral judgment is simply switched off for the sake of belonging to the group. Gabdrakhmanov is the only one who retains an internal conflict. He doesn't resist in the moment, but his psyche can't handle what's happening. Unlike the others, he can't fully rationalize what happened. He leaves the scene of violence, which already shows that what's happening is beyond what he finds acceptable. But at the same time, he doesn't take a decisive step, doesn't try to stop it, and doesn't seek help. This is an intermediate type, a person who understands that something bad is happening but is unable to intervene. These are the people who most often break down from guilt. His subsequent confession is not an act of courage in the classical sense, but rather a way to relieve the inner pressure that has been building up for years. Molchanov, who quickly disappears from the situation, demonstrates another kind of response, instinctive avoidance. He senses the threat and chooses the simplest strategy possible, to leave and not get involved. This is a defensive pattern, but without any sense of responsibility. He neither participates nor interferes. Lyubov Smirnova is a completely separate case. Her psyche is held together by attachment and hope. She stays in the denial stage for a long time because otherwise the situation becomes unbearable. She has an active way of coping with loss. She doesn't freeze, but acts, searches, travels, and checks different theories. This is an attempt to maintain control over a situation where there is no control anymore. Even turning to psychics isn't about belief, but about desperation and the desire to cling to anything. Inside her, two incompatible versions live at the same time, that her son is alive and that he is dead, and her mind holds on to both for a long time, so it doesn't collapse. In the end, the whole story is based on a combination of three psychological factors: a vulnerable victim, an impulsive leader with a need for dominance, and a group that is unable to stop what is happening. It is this combination that leads to the situation originally intended as a journey or a demonstrative act, quickly getting out of control and ending in tragedy. In court, Sergei Oserklitsyn behaved properly. In his final statement, he asked for forgiveness from Kirill's family and expressed regret that he had unintentionally become the cause of his tragic death. Oserklitsyn earnestly asked the court for leniency, spoke about his elderly parents whom he supports, and said that they depend on him. "I am begging you not to give me a harsh punishment," he repeated. But the court did not take his request into account. On December 7, 2021, a verdict was delivered in the case of Kirill Smirnov's death. Taking into account the testimony of the defendant and witnesses, as well as the results of the expert examinations, Sergei Oserklitsyn was found guilty of killing his former classmate and was sentenced to 15 years of imprisonment to be served in a high-security penal colony. After his release, he will face an additional sentence of restriction of freedom for 1 year and 6 months. In addition, the court ordered him to pay Kirill's mother compensation in the amount of 1 million rubles. The punishment for the criminal, a long sentence, money. It would seem that Lyubov Smirnova should feel some relief perhaps from the fact that the person who took her son's life will spend the next 15 years in prison. But neither the sentence nor the compensation can, and they won't bring back a human life lost for 500 rubles. And what do you think about this case? Leave your comments, like or dislike, and watch other videos on the channel. There are many of them, and a couple of them are in the on-screen suggestions right now.